Oh my gosh,
Welcome to Dare to Be Raw. Welcome to Dare to Be Raw, episode 2, where we're going to talk about anxiety, depression, and suicide.
I wanted to talk about these topics because it seems like the majority of the people my age struggle with anxiety and depression. And unfortunately, most people just don't get any help and don't reach out and don't talk about it. We're all kind of suffering silently, so I wanted to speak up and raise awareness about it.
I can definitely relate. High school for me was really difficult. I was majorly depressed, I had an eating disorder, and I was suicidal actually till the age of 28. I feel like COVID's made things worse for a lot of people. Families are cooped up together, getting on each other's nerves.
Yeah.
Watching television and their phone is a full-time job for teens. Unfortunately, social media and phones are a huge contributor to anxiety. First off, I'm an expert in the field of crisis intervention, certified in trauma, PTSD, and some mental health, but I am not a medical professional or a psychologist. I'll be sharing mostly from my own lived experience as a teen, and then just tips that I think will be beneficial as a parent as well. The unexpected can happen at any point in time without warning or specific triggers. Then there's some that are acute anxiety when a past trigger, a past event, or trauma can kind of bring it up. And the third is more like a social anxiety, which I think is what teens struggle maybe the most. Just the fear of failure, rejection, not fitting in.
I've had anxiety for a couple of years now, and it's a bit better, but it has been a legit struggle for me.
So how did you figure out that you had anxiety, and what were some of the triggers for you?
So for me, it was social situations. If I didn't feel included, and I'm just really sensitive in general. When I felt judged and not good enough for someone, especially in a group, I would start a panic attack. My heart rate would rise. I would get the shakes. Sometimes I had a hard time breathing. I would lock myself up in a stall at school and have a panic attack. Just wanted to be alone. And I couldn't be myself. Confrontation really makes me uncomfortable, so I really avoided it for a really long time. And it was a trigger for sure.
So how did you figure out that it was anxiety and not something else?
Whenever I started feeling, I had panic attacks, I decided to get a counselor, and that counselor made me realize that I had anxiety, which I didn't know. So she helped me, gave me tips and tricks, and just made me know that my feelings were valid and that it wasn't just exaggeration. It wasn't something I could just get over. So it was good to know that.
Right, and I think that's important for people to realize is it's a legit thing that your body goes through. So why are you afraid of abandonment or rejection or not being included? Like whatever those situations are for you, and then try to get help to figure out why that gets to you so that you can overcome it and one day not have to be struggling with that. When there's emotions that you're not properly dealing with, I think it's really important that whenever things happen to address them at that moment in time so that it doesn't accumulate and then our bodies respond with anxiety or depression. Yeah. You guys put so much pressure on yourselves. I was the same way. Pressures to be perfect, to please. In a few years when you're out of high school, gangs won't exist. Everybody's going to be on the same playing field. And so just be yourself. Because if people don't accept you for who you are, then they don't deserve to be in your life. It's their loss, not yours.
And that's something you'll learn in your life. Like, it's going to take some mistakes in relationships to figure out that these are better people in your life.
For sure. And it's by those mistakes in relationships that we get to know who we want in our life and who we don't. It's okay to make mistakes, but as long as we learn from them.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing. We're going to share 3 tips to overcome anxiety.
The first tip is to surround yourself with people who are happy and healthy, not only people who had stress and or pressure in your life. It's good to have friends that have the same problems as you so you can talk about it and have someone to relate to. At the same time, you need to have a mix, so you can't only have friends that have the same problems because who's going to pull you out of the pit? Have 1 or 2 go-to people who you can call when you're having a panic attack or when you're not well, and who will just listen and be there with you until it passes.
If if you want your body to be at its peak, you can't be abusing substances, caffeine or energy drinks. All of that stuff will mess with your brain chemicals and your body's performance. You're up and down like a yo-yo, and if you want to feel good and be sharp, stop putting your body through the ringer. So if ever you feel flustered about something and you can't find your car keys, you're late for work, take a step back and stop. My son, my stepson, a couple of years ago, he had friends, they were working on a project, and we were at a restaurant, and he kept getting phone calls, and the friends, I could hear them from the other end of the table yelling at Tyler. Somehow the laptop had lost their project. But all to say, by the time we got home, he was so escalated and he was on the verge of tears. He was having pretty much a panic attack. And I took him by the shoulders and I said, stop. When the friends called back, I took the phone and said, you're not calling here till we call you. So it's kind of like giving the teens, or for you guys to realize, you're in charge of you.
Yeah.
You're able to tell people, whoever, I'll get back to you when I'm ready. So right now, what's the next best move? What's the next thing you can do to fix this? Because you can't think when you're in that space.
And your real friends will stick with you, no matter what you have to do to make yourself feel better.
And just express yourself. Like, whatever's bent up inside is going to eat away at you. And for some, it's going to manifest in very different ways, headaches, stomach aches, but for others, it'll be anxiety.
In social situations, I often found myself picturing what I should be doing and how I should be acting. And if I didn't reach those sometimes like unattainable goals, I would be so hard on myself and I'd have a panic attack. Just remind yourself that it's okay not to be always at your 100% in social situations. People will accept you for who you are.
Yeah, it's okay to make mistakes, and it's so critical to stop putting that pressure, because I was just the same. Like, I just wanted to please so bad, and I wanted to be the perfect child. You just be yourself. A lot of times, nobody else is putting this pressure on us but ourselves, and we're our worst enemy.
So what about depression and suicide? I know it's something you really struggled with.
I fought depression for about 15 years until the age of 28, and I talk a lot about it in my book.
You have to get this book.
It's hard to describe how much I hated myself. I don't know that there are words. I tried my best in the book, but I remember banging my head against the wall, literally pulling my hair out of my head. I was the perfect child, poster child for teenagers. Every parent's dream, except that I was extremely miserable and bent up with this rage that would take over. And instead of lashing out or acting out on my parents or drinking or doing what normal teenagers do, I took it out on myself. I think the main reason was I was unable to express myself. I was unable to articulate my emotions. It eventually led to eating disorder. There was not a day that went by that I didn't want to die. After the eating disorder, I went into this really abusive relationships because even though the weight was put back on, I didn't love myself any more than I did before. I just refused to settle, and I refused to accept that I was going to be depressed or suicidal for the rest of my life. As much as I would get counseling, there were always things that I knew it wasn't done because I still hated myself. If I fast forward 11 years later, I was on a cliff in Calgary in my little red Tercel, and I had just driven from Edmonton. It was 3 of the craziest hours of my life. It just felt like there was a war going on, and I drove up to that cliff and I was ready to end it. And I remember kind of being strapped to the back of my seat. Like, I couldn't move the car into gear, but I could literally feel and see the spiritual warfare, like the battle between good and evil, trying to keep me alive and trying to take me out. And that night, I felt something come out of me. I saw it, and I saw it leave. I never had another suicidal thought again in my life. Never depressed from that moment on. And I mean, you don't have to believe me if you don't want to, but why would I make this up? I just want to encourage you that God knows that He wants us to have abundant life and just abundance of freedom and joy and peace through Him. And it only happened when I allowed Him into my life. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I think a lot of teens, and this is where I was, is the sense of hopelessness and the sense of why am I here and where am I going? And there's so many voices coming at you. It's really confusing. It's really loud. And although you may not see it or feel it, maybe you don't care about life and you wish you weren't here. Your life does matter. And you need to be tenacious for your freedom and let go of those things that are holding you down or holding you back. Just realize that every decision you make today is going to impact your tomorrow. And we don't know what tomorrow holds, but all I do know is unless you're going to fight for it, it may not come.
As teens, we feel like no one understands. We reach out for help. We feel like we can't talk to adults because they don't know what we're talking about and they don't get us. I don't know what I feel or think most of the time, so it's hard to express my emotions. Sometimes I can't even speak. I'm like speech paralyzed. It's a lot of things that adults don't often understand. They're just like, just express yourself, say what you feel, but sometimes we can't.
This is so how I felt growing up. I think for me it was more just the fear of displeasing, but I know I was extremely constipated emotionally. I couldn't figure out how to talk to people because I didn't even know what my emotions were. And so this is why the emotions are they're so bound inside of us. It's like a big ball. Actually, this is perfect. This is one of the outdoor decor here. But you know what? Your emotions become this big tangled mess inside of us. And if we're not used to putting words to those emotions, we just don't even know what we're feeling, but we just know we're a hot mess. So what do we do with that? Well, you got to unravel it one mess at a time, one situation at a time. Let's say something happens, it's important to address it right then and there, not wait a week or a year later, because you won't really remember what's being triggered. So if you're in a situation, just sit down and say, hey, you know what, this just happened and this is what I'm feeling. And then at least the parents can understand, okay, this is what this is. My parents didn't know I was struggling because I never told them. I was pretending like everything was great. And the problem with that is they weren't able to help me because they didn't know I was suffering.
And it doesn't have to be a family member who you talk to. It can also be a friend. So if a family member or a friend doesn't understand you and doesn't make you feel heard and valued, then just talk to someone else because there's plenty of people who care about you.
That's right.
So here are 3 tips to overcome depression.
When I was in high school, as I said, that was one of my biggest issues, and that's what snowballed into all the other issues I ever had. I was in a very dark place for the first 30 years of my life. I don't want you to go through that, and I don't want you to stay stuck inside yourself and think, oh, nobody gets me. Yeah, some people will get you, and it's a matter of you choosing to move forward and to do the steps that it's going to take for you to get better. Start doing that today. Don't wait for someone to come and hold you by the hand and make you feel all better, because that may not come. Number 2 is to get help. When I was in high school, I remember the first time I went to a counselor, there was one session and I walked out of there thinking, what planet was she from? If you don't feel like you're progressing at all, then go somewhere else. Don't stop until you find somebody that you connect with and that actually really helps you. Your life is way too precious. You're too precious. The third one is probably the most important for me. I wouldn't despair unless I believed I would see the goodness of God in the land of the living. In other words, I wouldn't despair unless I believed God could set me free, unless I believed God understood me and had the power to deliver me from all of these things. And if for you, you don't believe in God, that's fine, but you have to believe that I would despair unless I believed one day I'll be happy. Like, one day you won't be struggling with anxiety. Like, don't despair. You know what? I'm not putting up with this. One day it's going to get better. And that's what you have to cling on to. That's the hope of a better day to come. And you got to fight for it. You can't just lay down and take it. If you're just going to be one of those people that is just the victim and woe is me and I've had it worse than everybody else, eventually you're going to turn people off. You're going to find yourself alone because people don't like victims. So you really need to get that fire inside of you. Fight for yourself because you're worth it. And some of you don't have anybody else that'll be in your corner to fight for you. So if you don't fight for yourself, who else is going to?
And I just want to add, if you go through something, there's 2 options. You can either feel like a victim, or you can take the lessons you've learned in that situation and you can use them to better yourself. So it's all about how you approach problems and how you deal with it. That will create who you become and how you deal with things. It becomes a pattern.
All I wanted to do was die and crawl into a hole. Who would have thunk 20 years later that I'd write my story? The fact that I'm still here, I'm doing something with the suffering I went through. But this is why I'm busting the bubble, because it's time we just start getting real and start talking. The fact that you're here, you get to make a difference in someone's life, and that's worth being alive for.
So we hope you enjoyed, and we hope you stick with us for the other videos, because most of you will relate to at least one of our topics. So thank you for watching. Bye!
This episode was brought to you by So they'll be not sure.
Tam stress na kid publishing
One way too.
Oh my god.
Take one. So we're gonna have to take like 10.